It's dark. A cave mouth. A little daylight, and then nothing. Cold stone. Wet air. A hollowed bone holding animal fat, burning. And a hand, stained red to the wrist, reaching up toward a wall in the dark. This is your ancestor. 40,000 years ago. Half-starved. Wrapped in badly cut hide. In a world where roughly half of all children born never reached adulthood. And they are painting. Not sheltering. Not hunting. Not sharpening anything. They have walked into the back of a cave, in the middle of an ice age, carrying fuel they could have burned for warmth, to put a horse on a wall nobody can eat. Now look at what they were holding while they did it. The weapons of that era were, by any modern standard, crude. Sharpened wooden shafts, stone points hafted onto poles, handheld flakes struck off a core, the polished axe. The ground stone edge that made forest clearing and heavy woodwork possible was still tens of thousands of years away in most of the world. And the bow would not become standard hunting technology across Eurasia for another 30,000 years. So here is the anomaly, and it's stranger the longer you look at it. The same species that couldn't yet reliably kill an animal from a distance had worked out how to grind mineral into pigment, blend it with fat and marrow, mix it to bond with damp limestone, carry it into total darkness, and render a running horse with an accuracy that would hold up in a life-drawing class tonight. The art is more advanced than the toolkit. Think about what that should have meant. Every hour spent grinding ochre is an hour not spent napping a better edge. Every calorie burned walking to a pigment source is a calorie not returned to a child who might not survive the winter. A species that spends its scarce time on decoration should lose. Outcompeted, immediately, by the group next door making a sharper spear. That is not what happened. So why? Why did the most fragile creature on the landscape sink enormous resources into something that could not be eaten, thrown, or burned for warmth? It isn't decoration. And it isn't one reason. It's several, layered on top of each other, and every one of them is still running inside you tonight. Let's go through them. Start with the timeline itself, because most people have the order backwards. We imagine a neat staircase. First, survival. Then comfort. Then, once there's surplus and free time, art. Culture as dessert. Something you get to after the real work is finished. The evidence doesn't cooperate. At Blombos Cave on the southern coast of South Africa, archaeologists found ochre scored with a deliberate, cross-hatched pattern, dated to around 73,000 years ago. Not a scratch, not tool damage, a repeated, intentional design. At the same site, a workshop for processing ochre into pigment, with abalone shells used as mixing containers, goes back roughly 100,000 years. In Sulawesi, Indonesia, a painted scene of human-like figures gathered around a wild pig has been dated to at least 51,000 years, currently the oldest known image of a story anywhere on Earth. And on a small island just off its coast, a single-hand stencil has now been dated to more than 67,000 years ago. Someone put their palm against the rock, blew pigment across it, and left a mark that says nothing except I was here. It has been sitting there ever since. And in a German cave, someone carved a standing figure with the head of a lion and the body of a human out of mammoth ivory using stone tools. When modern researchers rebuilt it with the same materials, it took them 400 hours. 400 hours during an ice age, on an object with no function. Now line that up against the tools. Across that same stretch, the practical kit improves, slowly, incrementally, unspectacularly. The dramatic leaps in hunting and building technology mostly come later. Symbolic behavior didn't arrive after survival was solved. It arrived while survival was still catastrophically unsolved, which means it wasn't a reward for surplus. It was doing something. The second reason isn't really about art at all. It's about what has to be true inside a skull before art becomes possible. To draw a bison on a wall, you have to hold a bison in your head while no bison is present, and then make a mark that stands in for it. That sounds trivial because you do it constantly. It isn't. The mark is not the animal. Everyone looking at it knows the mark is not the animal, and yet everyone agrees to treat it as if it is. The moment a brain can do that, a door opens. Because once you can represent something that isn't in front of you, you can represent something that hasn't happened yet. You can run tomorrow's hunt before you go on it. You can picture the herd crossing the river 3 days from now and move the camp today. That is planning. And planning is the single most powerful survival tool a slow, weak, thin-skinned primate can possess. Here's the part worth sitting with. You cannot see planning in the archaeological record. Thoughts don't fossilize, but symbols do. A pierced shell, a cross-hatched pattern, a horse on a wall. Those are the visible fingerprints of an invisible machine. The art isn't the achievement. The art is the receipt, and it explains the ordering perfectly. A better spear is a downstream product of a mind that can model the future. The mind had to come first. The third reason is social, and it's the coldest and most practical of all of them. Humans do not survive alone. Your ancestors' real defense against starvation was never a weapon. It was a network. Other groups, over the next ridge and the ridge after that, who could be called on when a season failed. But there's a hard problem buried in that. How do you trust a stranger? Every other social animal cooperates through direct familiarity. You know that individual. You've groomed them. You've fought alongside them. That works right up until the group gets big enough that you can't know everyone. Then it collapses. Newman's broke that ceiling. Symbols are how. A shared marking, a particular bead style, a specific pattern of ochre on skin, does something no amount of personal grooming can. It lets two people who have never met identify each other as us in about half a second, and the scale of it is difficult to absorb. Ostrich eggshell beads are among the oldest ornaments humans made. Small, laboriously ground discs, drilled and strung. When researchers compared beads from Eastern Africa with beads from Southern Africa, they found that between roughly 50,000 and 33,000 years ago, the two regions were producing beads that were nearly identical. Same diameter, same aperture, same shell thickness. Those regions are more than 3,000 kilometers apart. That is not two groups independently having the same idea. That is a chain of contact running the length of a continent, in an era with no pack animals, no wheels, no roads. It is the oldest human social network anyone has identified. And among hunter-gatherer groups documented in recent times, we can see what a system like that is for. Ornament exchange functions as insurance. You give beads to a distant partner in the good years, so that in the bad years, when your own territory fails, there is somewhere you are entitled to walk to and be fed. Look at what that means in a famine. The group with a sharper spear can kill slightly better within its own valley. The group with a shared symbolic system can walk 200 kilometers and be taken in. Ornament wasn't vanity, it was a passport. And it explains the calorie problem from the start. All that expensive, apparently wasted effort on things you can't eat is exactly what makes the signal credible. Anyone can claim to be a reliable partner. Only someone genuinely capable of surplus and skill can produce an object that took 400 hours to make. The cost isn't a bug. The cost is the entire point. The fourth reason turns those painted walls into something most people have never considered them to be. Storage. Think about what a group's survival actually depends on. Which animals are dangerous from the front and which from the side. Where a herd goes when the frost comes. Which season a species is fat and which season it isn't worth the chase. That knowledge is worth more than any implement, and it has a terrible weakness. It lives in the heads of the oldest members of the group, and those heads die. Before writing, a group had one place to keep its accumulated intelligence. Living memory. One bad winter, one illness that takes the elders, and generations of hard-won information evaporate. The group doesn't just grieve. It gets stupider overnight, and has to relearn what it already knew. Now look at what the cave paintings actually depict. Overwhelmingly, animals. And not generic animals. Specific species, rendered with anatomical detail, sometimes shown in seasonal condition, in combinations that repeat across sites hundreds of kilometers apart. Whatever else those images were, they were an external memory, a place to put knowledge that was not a skull, and they are extraordinary teaching tools. You can gather every child in front of that wall and, in an afternoon, show them an animal most of them have never seen up close. Somewhere nothing can kill them while they learn. A wall doesn't gore anyone. A wall is available in winter. A wall is patient. So run the comparison. A sharper spear point makes one hunter, on one day, slightly more effective. A painted bison teaches 40 children across 3 generations where the animal is weak, how it moves, and when it can be taken. The spear is an improvement. The painting is a compounding asset. Now, none of this means the case is closed. It would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. We are reading intentions off objects, and that is always shaky ground. Nobody alive knows what those paintings meant to the people who made them. Some of the most dramatic claims are argued over hard by specialists, and a few will probably be revised. There's also a preservation problem that cuts right through the middle of the argument. We are comparing art that survived against tools that didn't. Deep caves are extraordinary preservation environments. Cold, stable, sealed. That's precisely why the art is still there. Meanwhile, the vast majority of ancient technology was made of wood, fiber, hide, resin, and cord, and essentially all of it has rotted away. Here's the number that should make you uncomfortable. Out of thousands of known Paleolithic sites, barely a dozen contain preserved wood. A dozen. Everywhere else, the entire wooden component of the toolkit, which was probably most of it, is simply gone, and we are reconstructing our ancestors from the stone leftovers. And when a site does preserve wood, the result is humbling. At one German site, a waterlogged lakeshore held onto hunting spears and throwing sticks from 300,000 years ago. Under 3D microscopes, researchers found deliberate splitting of the timber, debarking, aerodynamic shaping, seasoning to stop the wood cracking, and broken tools repaired on the spot. More sophistication than the stone tools of the same period had ever suggested. 300,000 years ago. And we only know because of one lucky lakebed. So part of what looks like art before tools may be a trick of the light. The paintings are visible because caves are good at keeping things. The toolkits are invisible because the ground ate them. That's a real qualification. But notice what it does and doesn't touch. It might narrow the gap. It doesn't erase the underlying fact. At a moment when this species was demonstrably struggling to stay alive, it was spending enormous, verifiable quantities of time and material on things with no physical use. The mystery isn't that the art is old. The mystery is that it's expensive. Step back, and the shape of what your ancestors did comes into focus. They didn't choose art over survival. That framing is the mistake. It's ours, not theirs. They had discovered, without any way of articulating it, that the most powerful survival technology available to a soft, slow animal was not held in the hand. It was the ability to make one thing stand for another. From that single capacity, everything follows. Language, teaching, trade with strangers, law, money. Every institution humans have built runs on the same trick that put a horse on a cave wall. A group of people agreeing that a mark means a thing. The groups that had it could store knowledge, coordinate at scale, and call on allies over the horizon. The groups that didn't were limited to what one generation could remember. Over enough time, in a world that regularly tried to kill everyone, that is not a close contest. They didn't build better hardware first. They built the operating system. So there was never one reason your ancestor knelt in the dark and painted instead of hunting. A timeline that ran the opposite way to the one we assume, with symbols appearing during the crisis rather than after it. A mind that had learned to prize a thought loose from the world and hold it, which is the same machinery as planning the future. A social system that used expensive, unfakeable objects to build trust with people it had never met, turning ornament into famine insurance. A wall that could hold a group's knowledge after the people carrying it were dead. And a species that, without knowing it, had found the one tool that makes every other tool possible. None of it was a luxury. All of it is still inside you. You are still doing it. Constantly. The logo you'd recognize in a fraction of a second across a crowded street. The song that's been running in your head since this morning. The doodle in the margin of a page you were supposed to be taking notes on. The story you'll retell tonight that you know isn't strictly true, because the true version isn't as good. That isn't your brain wasting time. That is the oldest survival system your species ever built. Still running in the background, still doing exactly what it was made for. Your ancestors picked up the pigment instead of the spear. Every single one of the people who did that lived long enough to pass it on, which is the only reason you have a hand that itches to draw at all.